The Veltar armada moved through space like a pack of metal predators, their black ships stretching for miles in every direction. Each vessel told a story of conquest, burn marks from desperate last stands, dents from asteroid bombardments, and the faded symbols of 100 dead civilizations welded to their hulls like trophies. Admiral Kethvar pressed his clawed hand against the command bridge's viewing port, watching the third planet from this system's yellow star grow larger. His reptilian eyes, evolved for hunting in the dark caves of his homeworld, could pick out the swirling white clouds and blue oceans that meant another world full of resources waiting to be claimed. "Status report," he hissed, his forked tongue, tasting the recycled air of his flagship. Lieutenant Zixtal, a younger Veltar with bright green scales still unmarked by battle scars, approached with a data tablet. "Sir, our advanced scouts have completed their survey. The dominant species calls themselves humans. They number approximately 8 billion across 7 continents." Kethvar's mandibles clicked in amusement. 8 billion? That's more cattle than we've processed in the last 3 systems combined. What's their military capability? "Primitive beyond belief, Admiral. They fight each other with metal slugs fired from chemical explosives. Their most advanced combat vehicles are powered by burning fossil fuels. We detected several orbital satellites, but they appear to be for communication and observation only." The Admiral's tail swished with satisfaction. 3 years ago, they had encountered the crystalline collective near the Vega system, beings of pure energy who had fought them to a standstill for 6 months before the Veltar finally withdrew. Before that, the Silicon Lords of Proxima had cost him nearly half his fleet. But humans? This would be like harvesting grain. Any spacefaring capability? Minimal, sir. They've placed a small research station around their moon using chemical rockets. Their fastest ships would take them hundreds of years to reach even the nearest star. We've observed some probes heading toward the system's outer planets, but they're powered by solar panels and moving at crawling speeds. Kethvar examined the holographic display showing Earth's continents. Green and brown land masses separated by vast blue oceans, with tiny lights marking their major population centers. No orbital defense platforms, no energy shields, no quantum cannons. It was almost disappointing. Far below on Earth's surface, Dr. Minji Park wiped sweat from her forehead as she crawled deeper into the cave system beneath Mount Sorak. The narrow tunnel opened into a vast underground chamber that her team had discovered only last month. What they had found inside defied explanation. The walls were covered in crystalline formations that seemed to grow in perfect geometric patterns. Each crystal was roughly the size of her fist, and they pulsed with a soft blue light that had no apparent power source. Her electromagnetic sensors were going crazy down here, detecting energy signatures that shouldn't exist in nature. "Professor Kim, you need to see this," she called out, her voice echoing in the cavern. Her colleague, a thin man in his 60s with wire-rimmed glasses, scrambled down the rope ladder they had installed. Professor Kim had spent his entire career studying ancient Korean artifacts, but nothing had prepared him for this discovery. "The resonance frequency is increasing," Minji said, checking her instruments. "It started 3 weeks ago as barely detectable background noise. Now it's strong enough that I can feel it in my bones when I get close to the formations." Kim approached one of the larger crystal clusters, pulling out his own scanner. "I'm reading similar formations at 17 other sites across the peninsula. The team in Busan reported that their crystals started glowing yesterday. Whatever these things are, they're all connected somehow." Above them, completely unaware of the ancient mysteries buried beneath their feet, the people of Seoul went about their daily lives. Office workers hurried to catch subway trains, students gathered in coffee shops, and families enjoyed evening walks along the Han River. None of them noticed the faint shimmer that had begun to appear around the city's tallest buildings, like heat waves rising from summer pavement. In the underground military command center beneath Seoul, General Hyuk was having the worst day of his career. The radar screens that should have shown routine air traffic were instead filled with contacts. That made no sense. Objects the size of city blocks were descending through the atmosphere, moving in perfect formation and completely ignoring the laws of physics as he understood them. "Sir, we're receiving similar reports from military installations worldwide," reported his communications officer, Major Suho. The Americans are tracking over 300 bogies on the east coast. The Russians are reporting massive contacts over Siberia. The Chinese are scrambling their entire air force. Hayuk studied the tactical display, his mind racing through decades of military training that had never prepared him for anything like this. The objects were slowing as they approached the outer atmosphere, but they had been traveling at speeds that should have torn them apart from friction alone. "What's our response protocol for this type of scenario?" he asked his staff. The room fell silent. There was no protocol for alien invasion, because no one had seriously believed it would ever happen. The general's aide, Captain Dabin, finally spoke up. "Sir, the President has authorized DEFCON 1. All military units are being mobilized, but honestly, our weapons weren't designed to fight targets in space." As if summoned by their conversation, the first Veltar dropships broke through the cloud layer above Seoul, their hulls glowing red from atmospheric entry. Each ship was the size of a football stadium, covered in weapon ports and shield generators that hummed with alien energy. The sight was both terrifying and strangely beautiful. Dozens of impossibly advanced spacecraft descending through the evening sky like falling stars, their running lights casting strange shadows across the city below. The first thing that struck people around the world wasn't the sight of the alien ships hovering over their cities, but the sudden silence that fell over every electronic device on the planet. Television broadcasts stopped mid-sentence, radio stations went quiet, and even smartphones fell silent for exactly 13 seconds. Then, every screen on Earth flickered to life at once. Admiral Kethvar's reptilian face appeared on televisions, in Seoul apartments, on electronic billboards in Times Square, on computer monitors in remote African villages, and even on the tiny screens of smartwatches. His yellow eyes, each the size of a human fist, stared directly at the camera with the cold indifference of a predator examining its prey. "Humans of Earth." His voice boomed in perfect Korean, English, Mandarin, Spanish, Arabic, and every other language spoken by more than 1 million people. The translation was flawless, as if he had spent years studying each tongue. "I am Admiral Kethvar of the Veltar Empire. Your world now belongs to us." In a cramped apartment in Busan, elderly Mrs. Hana dropped her cup of tea, the ceramic shattering, on the floor as the alien's voice filled her small living room. Across the city, construction worker Jinsu stopped his excavator mid-swing, staring at the creature speaking from his phone screen. Even children playing in Namsan Park stopped there, games transfixed by the impossible sight. "Your species has been evaluated and found adequate for labor purposes," Kethvar continued, his forked tongue flicking out between razor-sharp teeth. "You will surrender unconditionally within 1 solar rotation of your planet. Resistance is not only futile, but will result in the immediate vaporization of your largest population centers." The alien's image zoomed out, showing the bridge of his massive flagship. Behind him, Veltar soldiers in powered armor moved between holographic displays showing Earth's major cities. Each soldier stood nearly 8 feet tall, their scales gleaming. Under the ship's harsh lighting, weapons that hummed with contained energy strapped to their backs. "Your primitive weapons cannot penetrate our shields. Your nuclear devices would barely scratch our hull plating. We have conquered civilizations far more advanced than yours. Submit, and your deaths will be swift when your usefulness ends." The broadcast cut to exterior shots of the Veltar fleet, massive vessels that dwarfed Earth's largest aircraft carriers. Weapon ports along their hulls glowed with threatening energy, while smaller fighter craft buzzed around them like mechanical insects. The message was clear. Humanity was hopelessly outmatched. President Jinho sat in the Blue House Situation Room, his face pale as he absorbed the implications of what they had just witnessed. Around the polished conference table, his top advisors argued in hushed, urgent tones. Defense Minister Yuna was already on her phone with military commanders, while Foreign Minister Chanwu tried to establish contact with other world leaders. "What are our realistic options here?" President Jinho asked, his voice steady, despite the circumstances. Defense Minister Yuna looked up from a tablet displaying readouts from their military satellites. "Sir, I've consulted with our top generals and weapons specialists. Our most optimistic projections show that a coordinated nuclear strike might damage 1 or 2 of their smaller vessels. assuming we could somehow get past their defensive systems. And their response? Complete annihilation of every major city. On the planet within hours. Foreign Minister Chanwu ended his call and turned to the group. I've spoken with the American president, the Chinese premier, and the Russian president. Everyone's getting the same assessment from their military advisors. We're dealing with technology that's centuries beyond anything we possess. As world leaders struggled with impossible decisions. Something extraordinary was happening deep beneath their feet. In the cave system under Mount Sorok, Dr. Minji was documenting what she thought might be her final scientific discovery when the crystals around her suddenly erupted with blinding light. The gentle blue glow that had fascinated her team for weeks transformed into a blazing white radiance that filled the entire cavern. The electromagnetic readings on her instruments spiked beyond anything they could measure, and the harmonic resonance that had been building for days became a song that seemed to vibrate through the very rock around them. "Professor Kim, get down." "Here now," she shouted into her radio. But the device was squealing with interference. The crystalline formations weren't just glowing, they were growing. New crystal structures sprouted from the walls and ceiling, creating intricate geometric patterns that hurt to look at directly. The air itself seemed to shimmer, as if reality was bending around the ancient formations. Similar awakenings were happening across the globe. In the Amazon rainforest, indigenous tribes fled in terror as massive crystal spires burst from the jungle floor, their light visible from space. Beneath the ice sheets of Antarctica, research stations detected seismic activity as something vast stirred in the frozen depths. In the Sahara Desert, nomads watched in amazement as the sand began to glow, revealing crystal networks that stretched for hundreds of miles beneath the dunes. The Veltar fleet, hovering in perfect formation above Earth's major cities, suddenly detected energy signatures that made their instruments scream warnings. Admiral Keithvar rushed to his command console as his sensors registered power sources that shouldn't exist on a primitive world. "Report," he barked at his tactical officer. "Sir, we're detecting massive energy buildups across the planet's surface. The readings they're off our scales. Whatever's generating this power, it's more advanced than anything in our databases." On the tactical display, bright spots of light were appearing all over Earth's continents. Each pulse of energy was stronger than the total output of a Veltar battleship, and there were thousands of them appearing simultaneously. Lieutenant Zixtal approached with a data pad, his scales now pale with fear. "Admiral, these energy signatures, they match records from the old archives. The warnings about the forbidden sectors." Keithvar's blood ran cold. Every Veltar military officer learned about the forbidden sectors during their training. Regions of space where entire fleets had vanished without a trace, leaving behind only whispered stories of ancient guardians who protected certain worlds. Back. In Seoul, General Hyuk watched his radar screens with growing amazement. The energy signatures his sensors were detecting weren't coming from the alien ships overhead. They were coming from directly beneath major population centers. It was as if the Earth itself was awakening, revealing hidden power sources that had been sleeping for millennia. "Sir," reported Major Suho, his voice filled with wonder, "we're getting similar readings from military installations worldwide. There's something under the planet's surface, something that's been there all along." As if responding to his words, the ground beneath Seoul began to vibrate with a deep, musical tone that could be felt rather than heard. In apartment buildings across the city, windows rattled in their frames. In the Han River, the water itself began to glow with the same ethereal light that was emerging from crystal formations around the world. The age of humanity, as a species alone in the universe, was ending, but something far older and more powerful was just beginning to wake up. The space around Earth's solar system began to ripple like water, disturbed by an invisible stone. What had seemed like empty void between the planets suddenly shimmered, and then reality itself seemed to tear open as massive shapes emerged from dimensions that human science had no names for. The Guardian vessels didn't arrive. They materialized, as if they had always been there but hidden behind a curtain that was now being pulled away. Each ship was a masterpiece that made the Veltar fleet look like crude metal boxes in comparison. Their hulls flowed and shifted, like liquid mercury mixed with captured starlight. surfaces that seemed solid one moment and translucent the next, Admiral. Kethvar gripped his command chair as his flagship's systems began failing one by one. The lights flickered between normal illumination and emergency power, while control panels sparked and went dark without any visible attack. His weapons systems showed green across the board, but when his gunners tried to fire, nothing happened. The triggers worked, the targeting systems locked on, but the energy simply refused to leave their cannons. "Sir, it's not just us," reported his communications officer, scales pale with fear. "The entire fleet is reporting the same problems. Weapons systems are online but non-functional. Life support is working, but everything else is shutting down systematically." Through the viewing ports, Kethvar could see Guardian ships surrounding his fleet like ancient gods herding cattle. One vessel, easily 10 times the size of his flagship, drifted past close enough that he could make out details on its surface. What he saw made his warrior's heart skip a beat. The hull wasn't just beautiful, it was alive. Patterns of light raced across its surface like neural pathways, and he could swear he saw faces in the flowing metal, watching him with eyes that held the wisdom of millions of years. Lieutenant Zixtal stumbled across the bridge, holding onto control panels for support as the artificial gravity fluctuated. "Admiral, we're receiving a transmission. It's not coming through our communication systems. The message is appearing directly in our computer cores." The holographic display flickered to life, showing not the crude alien alphabet they expected, but symbols that seemed to write themselves in their minds, bypassing language entirely. The meaning was crystal clear, despite being composed of geometric patterns that hurt to look at directly. "Veltar Fleet, this is the Architect Collective. You will cease all hostile actions immediately and prepare to receive our terms." Kethvar's mandibles clicked in frustration. In 3 centuries of conquest, no enemy had ever dictated terms to him. "Open a channel," he growled. "Sir, we don't have communications anymore. They're controlling our systems remotely." As if responding to his thoughts, the alien presence continued. "Admiral Kethvar of the 3rd Conquest Fleet, your forces are now contained within this system. Any attempt to harm the protected species will result in your immediate removal from this plane of existence." The Admiral's scaled fists clenched. "I am the blade of the Veltar Empire. We do not surrender to anyone. Our forces span 1,000 star systems." The response came with an undertone of what might have been amusement. "Your empire spans exactly 0 systems at this moment. Every world you have conquered in the last century is now under our protection. Your home planet Veltara Prime is surrounded by our vessels. Your colonies have been evacuated. Your military installations have been deactivated." Holographic displays suddenly appeared throughout the bridge, showing impossible images. Veltar, worlds that should have been fortified beyond any assault, were now wrapped in the same flowing energy barriers that protected Earth. Their mighty war fleets drifted powerless in space, surrounded by guardian vessels that seemed more like living creatures than machines. "This is impossible," Kethvar whispered. But even as he spoke, he knew it was true. These beings had neutralized an interstellar empire in the time it took him to blink. Major Uthal, his chief tactical officer, approached with a data tablet that flickered with alien symbols. "Sir, we're receiving what appears to be surrender terms, but they're unlike anything in our military databases." Kethvar snatched the tablet and read the impossible words. Where he expected demands for unconditional surrender and execution, for leadership, he found something that made no sense in his warrior culture. The Architect Collective offered rehabilitation, not punishment, not slavery, not death, but a chance to learn what they called a different way of existing in the galaxy. The Veltar forces would be relocated to a world where they could rebuild their society, but this time under guidance that would teach them cooperation instead of conquest. "They want to help us?" Lieutenant Zixtal asked, reading over his shoulder. The concept was so alien to Veltar, thinking that it took several moments for Kethvar to process it. In their culture, defeat meant death or enslavement. Victory meant the right to take everything from the conquered, but these guardians seemed to operate under completely different rules. "There's more, sir," Uthal added nervously. They're offering the same terms to every species in our empire. The enslaved populations aren't being freed to seek revenge. They're being offered the choice to rebuild alongside us or return to their homeworlds. On Earth, Dr. Minji stood in what had once been a simple cave, but was now transformed into a command center that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. The Guardian she had been speaking with, a being of pure light that called itself Architect Prime, explained what was happening throughout the galaxy. "How your species calls it justice," the ancient being said, its voice like music made of mathematics. "We call it evolution. The Veltar became conquerors because they knew no other way to survive. We will teach them that cooperation is stronger than domination, that building up others strengthens everyone." President Jinho, now connected to the Guardian network through crystal formations that had emerged in the Blue House basement, asked the question that had been troubling him. But what about justice for their victims, the species they destroyed? "Death ends learning," Architect Prime replied. "We prefer transformation. The Veltar will spend the next 1,000 years helping to rebuild what they destroyed. Their former slaves will choose whether to accept that help or build their futures elsewhere. Some will choose forgiveness, others will choose separation. Both paths lead to growth." Back on the Veltar flagship, Admiral Kethvar stared at the surrender terms with growing amazement. No execution for war crimes, no trials for genocide, no punishment beyond the requirement to learn a different way of living. It was mercy on a scale that his species had never imagined possible. "Sir," his aide asked quietly, "what are your orders?" Kethvar looked out at the Guardian vessels surrounding his fleet, these impossible ships that could have vaporized his entire armada, but instead chose to offer hope for redemption. For the first time in his military career, he felt something other than pride or anger. He felt humbled. "Signal all ships," he said finally. "We accept their terms." As his words were transmitted, the Guardian vessels began to move, not as warships, positioning for battle, but as shepherds gently guiding a lost flock toward a better path. The age of Veltar conquest was over, but perhaps something better was about to begin. The global vote had taken place over 7 days, with every human on Earth connected through the Guardian Crystal Network. The decision wasn't made in government, buildings, or by world leaders. It was made in the minds and hearts of ordinary people who suddenly found themselves part of something larger than anything they had ever imagined. In Seoul, taxi driver Bongu felt the weight of the choice as clearly as the mother of 3 in Sao Paulo, the farmer in rural Kenya, and the teenager in Tokyo. 8 billion voices joined together in the most important decision humanity had ever made. The final tally was closer than anyone expected. 51% chose to accept the role of Galactic Guardians, while 49% preferred to remain under protection. Dr. Minji stood in the crystal chamber that had become the focal point of human Guardian communication, but she was no longer quite the same person who had first discovered the formations weeks ago. The neural interfaces required for her role as humanity's representative had changed her on a fundamental level. Her eyes now held flecks of the same starlight that flowed through Guardian vessels, and when she spoke, her words carried harmonics that resonated with crystalline formations across the planet. "We accept the responsibility," she announced to the assembled Architect Council, beings of pure energy that manifested as shifting patterns of light and consciousness. "But we do it our way." The lead Guardian, Architect Prime, pulsed with what might have been approval. As it should be, each Guardian species brings its own wisdom to the collective. The crystalline shepherds of Vega bring patience. The quantum weavers of Centauri bring precision. What will humanity bring? Minji smiled, and for a moment, her human nature shone through the alien enhancements. Hope, and the stubborn belief that anyone can change for the better. The transformation of Earth began immediately, but it happened in a way that surprised even the ancient Guardians. Instead of replacing human cities with alien structures, the Guardian technology integrated itself seamlessly with existing architecture. The Eiffel Tower became a broadcasting antenna for interdimensional communications, its iron lattice now glowing with patterns of contained starlight. The Great Wall of China transformed into a planetary defense grid, each stone infused with energy shields that could protect entire continents. In Seoul, the skyscrapers of Gangnam grew taller and more beautiful. their glass surfaces now containing crystalline matrices that could process information faster than the most advanced computers. But they still looked like human buildings, designed by human architects for human inhabitants. Street vendors still sold kimchi and tteokbokki from carts that now hovered silently above the sidewalks, while children played in parks, where the playground equipment responded to their imagination, creating new games from pure thought. The shipyards, that appeared overnight, were perhaps the most magnificent sight of all. Floating above the Pacific Ocean, these impossible structures stretched for hundreds of miles, where human engineers worked alongside guardian architects to build vessels that could cross galaxies in the blink of an eye. But these ships carried more than just advanced technology. They were designed with Korean tea ceremonies in mind, with observation decks perfect for watching sunsets, and with cargo holds that could preserve the seeds and soil of Earth for planting on distant worlds. Admiral Keithavar stood in what had once been his command bridge, but was now something between a classroom and a therapy session. The Veltar rehabilitation program was unlike anything his warrior culture had ever conceived. Instead of punishment for his crimes, he was being taught to understand why those crimes had been wrong in the first place. His instructor was Captain Sumin, a former Korean naval officer who had been among the first humans to accept Guardian enhancement. She moved with the fluid grace of someone who had learned to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously, but her smile was entirely human and surprisingly warm. "Today we're going to discuss the Kepler 442 system," she said, bringing up a holographic display of a star system that Kethvar recognized with shame. "Your forces conquered this system 14 years ago. Can you tell me what you remember about the inhabitants?" Kethavar's scales darkened, a sign of embarrassment in his species. They were called the Harmony Singers, musical beings who communicated through sound frequencies. We silenced them because their songs interfered with our communication systems. And now? The hologram shifted to show the same system, but transformed. The Harmony Singers were alive again, their crystal cities restored, and their songs once more filling the space between planets. But now Veltar engineers worked alongside them, having learned to build communication systems that harmonized with the music rather than drowning it out. "You brought them back," Kethvar whispered, his voice filled with an emotion he had no name for. "We all brought them back," Sumin corrected gently. "Humans, Guardians, and reformed Veltar working together. Your people have spent the last year learning their songs and helping to rebuild their cities. Some of your former soldiers have become their closest friends." The transformation wasn't limited to the former conquerors. Across the galaxy, species that had been enslaved or destroyed were given choices that the old Guardians had never offered. Some chose to rebuild their homeworlds, exactly as they had been. Others decided to start fresh on new planets, taking only the best parts of their old cultures. Many chose to join the growing community of Guardian species, adding their unique perspectives to the collective wisdom. On a world in the Proxima system, human colonists worked alongside former Veltar soldiers and rescued crystal singers to build something entirely new, a city that existed partially in normal space and partially in the harmonic dimensions where music became solid matter. Children of 3 different species played together in parks, where their games created actual flowers made of crystallized sound. Dr. Minji, now Admiral Minji of the Guardian Fleet, stood on the bridge of humanity's first interstellar vessel, the Soul's Dream. Through the viewing ports, she could see a dozen other human ships preparing for their first mission, responding to a distress call from the edge of the galaxy, where a young species was facing extinction from a cosmic disaster. Her crew was a mixture of humans, reformed Veltar crystal singers, and even a few of the mysterious quantum weavers who existed as living mathematics. They worked together with the easy familiarity of people who had learned that differences in appearance meant nothing compared to shared values. "Captain," reported her communications officer, a young human named Dion, whose neural interfaces allowed her to speak with crystalline life forms. "We're receiving updates from the other Guardian fleets. The Centauri shepherds are handling the crisis in the Magellanic Clouds. The Vegan crystal hearts are dealing with the collapsing star in Sector 7. we're clear to proceed to our assigned coordinates. As the soul's dream engaged its reality-folding drive, Minji reflected on how much had changed in just 1 year. Humanity had gone from a single world to caretakers of an entire galaxy. But perhaps more importantly, they had proven that growth and redemption were always possible, even for species that had committed terrible crimes. The ship emerged from hyperspace above a world where desperate refugees were fleeing a dying sun. But instead of arriving as conquerors or even as distant saviors, they came as neighbors offering help, bringing not just advanced technology, but the hard-won wisdom that anyone, even the worst among them, could choose to become something better. The galaxy had new guardians now, and they carried with them humanity's greatest gift, the unshakable belief that tomorrow could always be better than today, no matter how dark things seemed right now. The end.